right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going way back, like back to the 20th century.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at it through this lens of international relations, kind of like a crash course
Okay.
for, well, maybe someone just starting out in the field.
Right.
And we're using this chapter from a book called International History of the 20th Century.
Okay.
It's by Anthony Best. And the goal is to really see, like, okay, what were the big events? What were the ideas that kind of shaped everything?
Yeah.
And how does it all, like, connect to the world that we live in now?
Right. Right. It's a big century.
It's a big one, yeah.
A lot going on.
So much happened. So I guess to kind of kick things off, one of the, like, big ideas that I kept seeing was this whole, like, shrinking world concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that about?
Well, I mean, you think about it, during the 20th century, travel gets a lot faster, communication gets faster.
Right, right.
Trade is easier, and it just starts to create this feeling that countries are closer together, closer than they've ever been, and they're all relying on each other more and more.
So it's not just like, oh, we can get on a plane and fly across the world.
No, no.
But it's like, what happens in one place?
Yeah, it has a ripple effect.
It has this impact everywhere.
Exactly. And that's kind of where you see like these international organizations starting to pop up.
Okay.
Things like the UN. They're trying to kind of deal with this whole new global landscape, trying to figure out how to solve problems that like everyone's facing.
Huh. It sounds like a pretty, like, dramatic shift from how things were before.
Oh, for sure.
Like, did every country kind of just, like, jump on board with this whole we're more connected thing?
It wasn't that simple. There was also this other like huge force happening at the same time, which was modernization.
Oh, right.
Companies everywhere, they're all trying to figure out how do we develop our economies? How do we get better technology? How do we evolve our societies? They went about it in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Not at all.
So with this modernization thing, it wasn't just like, oh, we got new gadgets now.
No.
It was like changing like whole systems.
Yeah, it's political systems, it's social structures, everything.
So I imagine that probably created some tension.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you see this clash between like tradition and modernity playing out all over the place. I mean, think about like the rise of political Islam, for example. That's a movement that's pushing back against some of these Western ideas about what modernization should look like. They're saying, no, we want to root our political power in our traditional beliefs.
Wow. Okay, so modernization, not a simple thing.
Not at all.
Lots of bumps in the road. So as the world is modernizing, as it's becoming more and more interconnected, what's happening with the whole balance of power, globally?
Well, one of the biggest things that happened was that Europe, which had basically been calling the shots for centuries, they had these massive empires. Yeah. All of a sudden, those empires start falling apart, and you see new powers rising up, like the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And at the same time, colonialism is weakening, and all these new nation states are popping up in Asia and Africa. It's like the whole map of the world is getting redrawn.
Whoa, that's a big change. And with all that happening, with all these like new players on the scene and old powers, kind of fading away, did it make the world like more unstable?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, the 20th century, it saw a level of violence and conflict that was like just unprecedented.
Wow.
And there's a whole bunch of things feeding into it. You've got these clashes of ideologies, you've got this intense nationalism, and then you've got these crazy advancements in military technology, which are making the conflicts even more destructive.
So it's like we've got this shrinking world. We've got countries trying to modernize in all these different ways. And then the whole like power structure is getting shaken up.
Right.
That does sound like a recipe for some serious problems. I mean, was anyone like seeing this coming? Did anyone try to like stop it?
Well, there were definitely people who thought that war was like becoming a thing of the past.
Really?
Yeah, like there's this guy, Norman Angell, and in 1910 he wrote this book called The Great Illusion. And his whole argument was that like war just doesn't make sense anymore, economically speaking. He's like, peace is the only logical outcome.
Huh. So there was like some optimism, at least at the beginning of the century.
Yeah.
But it obviously like things didn't exactly go that way.
No, not at all.
So what happened?
Well, one of the big things was that this system they had in Europe for keeping the peace, it basically fell apart. It was called the Concert of Europe.
Okay.
And it had been working, more or less for a good chunk of the 19th century. The idea was that the big European powers, they would all cooperate. They would use diplomacy to prevent things from getting out of hand.
Hmm.
But when that system crumbled, it's like it created this power vacuum.
Ah, okay.
And then you start to see all these new rivalries and alliances forming. And that's what ultimately leads to these massive conflicts like World War I and World War II.
Oh, right, right. So those wars, I mean, they obviously had like just a massive impact on everything.
Yeah, completely reshaped the world.
Did they kind of like set the stage for the whole like Cold War thing?
Yeah, absolutely. After World War II, you end up with these two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union,
Right.
and they basically become the dominant forces in global politics. And the whole second half of the 20th century is this tense standoff between them.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've got all these like events, all these trends, all these ideas kind of swirling around, shaping the 20th century. But like, how does it all connect to international relations? As like a field of study.
Well, that's where things get really interesting to see. By looking at these historical events, we can start to pick out patterns, right?
Mhm.
We can test different theories, and we can start to understand the forces that drive how countries act on the world stage.
Hmm.
Like, think about the rise and fall of empires, or the role of ideology in starting conflicts, or how international organizations can help or sometimes hinder things. These are all major concepts in international relations, and they all have their roots in what happened during the 20th century.
So it's not just about like memorizing names and dates.
No, no, no.
It's like taking history and using it to like figure out how the world actually works.
Exactly.
Why do countries act the way they do?
Yeah.
What makes them cooperate or go to war?
Yeah, it's like using history as a laboratory to figure out the whole system.
I like that. So for all our listeners out there who are, maybe just getting started with international relations,
Yeah,
pay attention to the 20th century. There's a lot to learn there,
absolutely.
and it can help you make sense of this crazy, complex world that we're all living in.
Great foundation.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still so much more to explore.
Oh, yeah, tons.
In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to dig into some specific events and look at some of the lasting consequences of the 20th century. So stay tuned.
Yeah, this is just the beginning.
Wow, it's kind of wild to think about just how much changed during the 20th century. I mean, we've talked about globalization and modernization and how power shifted around, and then of course all the conflict. Are there any like specific things like events or whatever that really like show these trends in action?
Well, I mean, you can't really talk about the 20th century without talking about the two world wars, right?
Right, right.
Those were truly global conflicts. They touched every corner of the planet.
Hmm.
And, they really highlight some of the dangers of things like nationalism,
Yeah.
the just destructive potential of new technology and, how badly things can go when international cooperation breaks down.
It's hard to even fathom the scale of those wars
Oh, yeah.
and just how much they like changed the course of history. But after World War II, it seemed like, there was this like real push to create a more stable world order.
Yeah.
Did that work?
I mean, it's kind of complicated. On the one hand, yeah, you get the United Nations.
Right.
You get this whole system of international law and institutions that are designed to prevent another war like that.
Hmm.
But then almost right away, the world gets split in two by the Cold War.
Oh, right.
This massive rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And, it was a period of intense ideological competition, proxy wars. I mean, the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. It was a scary time.
So even with, these efforts to try and make the world safer, the threat of conflict, it never really went away.
No, it kind of morphed into something else.
Mhm.
Like the Cold War, it wasn't a big traditional war, with armies clashing on battlefields.
Right.
But it was still this underlying tension that shaped everything.
And even after the Cold War ended, I mean, new challenges popped up, right?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Like terrorism.
Yeah.
That seems like a whole different kind of threat.
It is. And it kind of highlighted how warfare itself was changing.
Hmm.
It's not just about states fighting each other anymore.
Right.
You've got these non-state actors, these groups that don't play by the traditional rules.
So how does studying international relations like help us make sense of all this?
Well, I mean, one of the things it does is it gives us tools to analyze like why these different actors do what they do.
Okay.
Like what are their motivations? What strategies are they using? And by understanding the historical context, the power dynamics at play, we can, try to predict how countries might react to different situations.
Okay.
And then, hopefully that helps us come up with ways to promote cooperation, manage conflicts, and, ultimately try to make the world a little bit better, a little bit safer.
So it's about using history to not just understand the present, but to like try and get a glimpse of what might be coming next.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. The 20th century, it's full of examples of how states interact, how alliances form and break apart, and how one event can trigger a whole chain reaction across, the whole global system.
Right. So it's like having this like roadmap to navigate all the twists and turns of international politics.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But it's a roadmap where, the roads are constantly changing.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. So the chapter we're looking at, it mentions a few specific challenges that kind of came to the forefront in the late 20th century and the early 21st century. One that really stood out to me was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a conflict that's rooted in historical grievances,
Right.
competing claims to the same land and, deeply held beliefs on both sides. It's a conflict that's been going on for a long time, and it's one that's really hard to see an easy solution for.
It sounds like a situation where like understanding the history is absolutely essential.
Yeah, if you don't understand the history, you can't really understand what's happening today.
Right.
And it's not just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Right.
There are so many places around the world where the legacies of colonialism or political instability or economic inequality, they're all still fueling conflicts and unrest.
So it's not just about knowing what happened in the past.
No.
It's about understanding how those events are still shaping the present.
Yeah, exactly. And how they might influence the future.
The past is never really past, is it?
No, it's always there. It shapes how we see the world, how we make decisions. It creates the conditions for both cooperation and conflict.
That's a powerful thought. So to all of you listening who are, starting to explore the world of international relations, remember, history isn't just like a bunch of dates and names.
Yeah.
It's a story that's still being written, and we're all a part of it.
That's a great way to put it. By engaging with that story, by really digging into the events and ideas that have shaped our world, you can start to understand the forces that drive international politics and maybe even find ways to contribute to building a more peaceful and just world.
And that's a great place to pause for now.
Okay.
We'll pick up the conversation in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
It's crazy, right? Like we've just skimmed the surface of the 20th century, and it's clear how much of, everything that happened back then still affects us. Like, empires falling apart, new powers coming up, all the technological changes and the wars, like it all kind of set the stage for how the world works today.
It's true. And it's like we're still dealing with the fallout from some of those big trends, globalization, modernization, and sadly, the conflict too. It's like we're building on top of what happened in the 20th century, but the challenges are even more complex now.
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone listening who's just starting to learn about international relations, what advice would you give them? What are some of the like key things to keep in mind?
I'd say number one, just be curious. Like this field is always changing. You've got to be ready to like question everything you think, look at things from different angles and just never stop learning.
Stay curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, history matters. Like what happened in the past, even if it seems like ancient history, it's still shaping the world today. Understanding that historical context, it's like having a key to unlock what's happening right now and maybe even get a sense of what might happen next.
It's like having like a mental map to help you navigate everything. Okay, so what about the theory side of things? I mean, there's so many different schools of thought in international relations, so many different ways of looking at the world. Like, where do you even start?
Yeah, it can definitely feel overwhelming. I mean, there are a lot of theories out there, but like, don't get too bogged down in the jargon or anything.
Right.
Think of them as like different tools that you can use to analyze what's going on.
Okay.
Each one gives you like a slightly different perspective on the world.
Like different lenses.
Yeah, exactly. So explore different theories, try them out, see how they fit with, your own understanding of history and what's going on in the world. As you learn more, you'll start to develop your own way of analyzing things, like your own framework for understanding international politics.
That makes sense. It's about finding the tools that work for you, the ones that help you make sense of all the complexity and sometimes chaos out there. So any resources you'd recommend for someone just starting out, like books, journals, websites, anything like that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the chapter we've been talking about, the one from Anthony Best's book, it actually has a really good list of further readings
Oh, got on.
that, they go into more detail about specific events, regions, themes, all sorts of stuff.
Okay. Oh,
And beyond that, I'd say, like, check out some reliable news sources from different parts of the world. You want to get different perspectives on things.
right. Get the whole picture.
Yeah, and there are some great online resources too, like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. They both have some really insightful analysis and commentary on current events.
Awesome. And don't forget, libraries are like gold mines of information.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, you could find books and journals, even like primary source documents. That stuff can really bring history to life.
Absolutely. And don't be shy about talking to people, like have discussions with your classmates, your professors, even people outside of the field. The more you talk about these issues, the more you'll understand them and the more you'll develop your own like unique perspective.
So to kind of sum it all up, if there's like one big takeaway from our deep dive into 20th century international history, I think it's that the past isn't just something that's over and done with.
No, not at all.
It's a conversation that's still going on, and it's shaping our present and our future.
Absolutely. And as you're, starting to explore international relations, remember to stay curious, question everything, and never forget that global events have a real impact on people's lives.
We hope this deep dive has, kind of sparked your curiosity, given you a taste of what international relations is all about. It's a fascinating field. It's complex. It's always changing.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep learning. The world needs more people like you, thoughtful, engaged people to help build a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, that's a wrap for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.